Hello, today I'd like to show you how to make this card using Copic markers as well as stamps and papers by MemoryBox. And to get started, I stamped my bird onto some pattern paper by MemoryBox from the Glitterati collection. And I stamped him again onto some white paper so that I would be able to cut him out and glue him onto the pattern paper just so that he would show up a lot better. You could color him directly on this paper, but I wanted a really nice dark bird that would stand out, so I colored him on white paper instead. So to do that, I stamped the crested bird onto white paper from MemoryBox, which works really well with the Copic markers. And to do that, I used the black memento pad, which seems to be the standard with people who color with Copic markers. It dries really fast and you don't have to heat set it before you color. And the colors I'm using today are R27, which is cadmium red, R59, which is cardinal, a nice dark gray, this case it's going to be C5, cool gray number 5, and any color for the beak, any yellow, orange would work just fine, but I chose to use Y17 or golden yellow. Now when you color with Copic markers, one of the things that people comment on is that you can get a nice, smooth, streak-free finish. And you can. All you have to do is use nice, smooth circles when coloring your object. Whenever you use circles, it just tends to blend a lot better. And as you can see, when I finish with that, I'm going to get a look that's streak-free and a nice solid color. However, anytime I'm trying to color something in nature, whether it's fur, hair, in this case feathers, I don't try to get a perfect finish like that. I want to have some variation in color. So instead of doing these nice smooth strokes and trying to get a solid red, I'm just going to color my bird in the direction that feathers would grow or hair would grow, and I'm just going to give a nice base layer of color using this light red. And for anyone that hates coloring outside of the lines, this is going to drive you crazy, but I am going to cut out the bird, so I'm not going to worry about going over the line. It just goes a lot faster if you just color the whole thing. Then I'm going to add a second layer of color to the breast of the bird to get it a little bit darker. And to do that, I'm going to start on the edge and just feather some color into my bird. And by feathering, what I mean is I press down with my pen and lightly flick up as I'm coloring. And by doing that, you can see right here it's a lighter red color. It's just going to blend into that first layer a little bit better than if you colored it dark and solid the whole time. And you can see I did a first one level of color over that, but it didn't show up very much, so I'm going to add a second coat essentially of my red marker, and then decide I might add just a little bit more red to the breast. And you can go over and over it. The nice thing about using an alcohol-based marker is that even though I'm going over and over with layers of color, it's not going to make my paper pill up at all. And I think that's kind of a nice finish to that one. So I'm going to stop there. Then I'm going to use the darker cardinal color. And I actually looked up online to see what cardinals look like, because even though I see them all the time, I couldn't really picture the coloring. So the wings are definitely a darker red than the body. And then I noticed in the pictures that they had a little bit of a black or a dark gray to the wing. So I decided that I was going to add just a little bit of this dark gray to try and get that look. And what I'm going to do here is the exact same technique that I did here of coloring my color into the original layer. And I'm just going to feather a little bit of this gray into the wing. And you can see by that I have a nice dark outline. And I thought that looked a little bit like the cardinals I saw. Finally, add a little bit of yellow for the beak, and he's done. It's actually a very quick image to color. The thing that took the longest would probably be cutting him out, but I have one here that I already did. And you can see from my practice paper that some of it bled through. Always be aware of your working surface when you're using Copic markers because they're alcohol based and will bleed. So here's one I cut out. The paper, memory box paper, is a white core paper, and obviously this was a whole white piece. If you decided that you wanted the edge to be a little bit darker, instead of using a Copic marker which bleeds a lot, I would use a Prismacolor pencil and just edge it a little bit if you want a nice dark outline. But that's an optional step, and usually when you glue it down onto your paper, you're not going to notice anyway. So the next thing I would do with this is add him to the pattern paper. But before I do that, I want to, if you see my original, I actually colored a little bit of green over the branch so that it would show up a little bit better. And to do that, I'm going to use a Prismacolor pencil. You could use a Copic marker, especially the originals that have a nice tiny end on one side. But your Prismacolors are a nice fine point that you're not going to have to worry about any kind of bleeding on you. And just color in the leaves. And I also went by and outlined the branches a bit so they would show up. And you might be wondering, why didn't I just stamp it in green if I was going to end up outlining everything in green? And the reason is, especially with pattern papers, I think it shows up a little bit better if you've stamped it in black and then outline it with a little bit of color. So what I would do here is just finish up all my coloring with the Prismacolor, glue my bird on, and then cut this out. And once I did that, I added some pearls as a finishing touch, and I want to go ahead and show you how I do that. Everybody has their own method for adding pearls. I like to use an X-Acto knife, and this is one of the Fisker's new ones that you use over your finger, and usually you hold it like this and you cut, and that works really well. But for this project, I find it a little easier to hold it a little firmer in my grasp. And what I do is I slice through the glue there that holds it onto the paper and then slide it off using the tip of the X-Acto, which allows you to place it exactly where you want it to go. And I'm not going to lie, when you first start this and you're practicing, you might have a few fly off on you until you get the feel for sliding the X-Acto underneath it and placing it where you want it to go. But it adds a nice dimension to your finished card, so I encourage you to try those and see what you think. And finally, I want to show you a second card, which is exactly the same as the first card I did. I just changed the color that I used. And in this case, I used the B00, which is frost blue, and B12, which is ice blue. But I used the same yellow, I used the same gray marker, and the same technique. But you get a completely different look just by changing the color of your bird. And one thing to keep in mind is I also just chose a different part of my pattern paper. If you see here, this part of this paper has a nice blue color to it, so I decided to use it with a blue bird. On this one, I tried to cut it so that I could pick up some of these little red flowers to go with my red cardinal. But it's a really easy technique to color these birds with the Copic markers, and you can get two very different looks. I hope you've enjoyed. Thanks.